So come on over, have a seat, rest your feet. Paul's going to get us started right now.
Right now it's good.
Paul, how you doing?
I'm doing good. Thanks so much, guys, for having me.
Fantastic, fantastic. Ladies and gentlemen, put your hands together for me.
Yeah. Thanks, guys. All right, so I'm Paul Castellano. I'm a full-time guide on the Niagara River in Lake Erie. And I want to share with you, has anyone here fished the Niagara Bar before? No? So is anyone here familiar with where it is? Okay, so there's an area of Lake Ontario where the Niagara River dumps out. There's all kinds of current coming out, and it's a timing thing. In the fall of the year, you get a huge return of bait fish, and as the water temperature drops, summertime there's other species there, but this is about fishing brown trout and lake trout, in the Great Lakes, but specifically the Niagara Bar. But if you fish anywhere you fish for lake trout or steelhead or brown trout, it could be an inland lake. It could be another Great Lake. These are techniques that have proven themselves for the past, what is it now, Hiroshi? Has it been 14 years since the first design? 14 years? Yeah, right? So I'm also a lure tester for Nishine Lure Works and have been for the last 14 years. So before stuff gets mass produced and put into production for you guys to purchase and use, we put it through all kinds of testing. Different scenarios, different hooks, different modifications, whatever. But this year, as a full-time guide, the bar is called like Niagara fever, right? The amount of fish that will congregate, and it typically starts sometime in late October as the days get shorter and the water temperature drops. The amount of fish that will congregate at the mouth of this river to feed, you'll get stained water from big winds happening on Lake Erie, flows through the upper Niagara, comes over the falls, and dumps out into the river. And Lake Ontario is so clear, as most of you know, that any plume of mud or change in temperature, especially in the fall, it attracts, there's a run of alewives, smaller alewives, there's baby smelts, there's adult smelts, and there's emerald shiners. And these schools of bait are, this is all boat fishing, but the same techniques can work from a pier, at the mouth of a river, wherever you have access to fish the Great Lakes when the trout are moving. But the schools of bait sometimes are so thick, they're like between 10 and 30 feet thick sometimes. So the fish will kind of set up. There's the true Niagara Bar is a big long extension that comes out in Lake Ontario off 4 Mile Point. But at the mouth of the river, everybody calls it the bar. But there's just there's a deep hole that goes like 90 feet, 100 feet, and it comes out like a hockey stick. It makes a 90-degree turn. And the current rushing over it, the fish just set up there as the bait runs over the bar and comes down, the fish kind of pin them and you'll get birds diving. It's very saltwaterish, but there's different things we've learned. There's lots of ways to fish it, but has anyone here heard of the smelt heads? Nishine Lure Works smelt heads? Okay, yeah, you could change. Please, thank you. Which one do I push? Yeah, oh, I'll let you. So the smelt head, it's a jig head that Hiroshi came up with, and it pairs well with lots of different plastics. This is a 4-inch plastic. I've got some different sizes here, different colors. But, there's different weights. And it hangs perfectly horizontal, right? So there's different things we do with this. We do, like when the fish are there and it's happening with my customers, we'll do a lot of casting, so a long cast out. And let's just say we're in 80 feet, and then this hill comes up, guys, if you can see me. This hill comes up, and it ramps right up and comes up to like 20 feet to 14 feet, this big hill. So we'll start out in this deep water, we'll fire out these baits, and we'll start like a steady retrieve. And the one thing that I found that I really want to share with you is most people, when you fish deep water, they think, geez, I need a heavy jig. I got to get down to the bottom. I got to get, but one thing that I've learned is having different size heads. And I use these a ton, like on a daily basis to get people fish to come out with me and really to support my family. And these have caught countless fish over the years, and it's so easy to use. But three or four different sizes I'm going to share with you. The heavier heads obviously sink faster, it's a no-brainer, and allow you to fish deeper. But the same lure, say I'm in 40 feet, I'm coming up 30 feet, 20 feet. Sometimes I cast it out there, it hits the water, and I start a steady retrieve right away. So it's only down 3, 4, 5 feet. And changing the color of the bait based on, typically the water is very clear, so we're using a lot of natural colors and the 3 and 4 inch size, but there's times where we're using brighter colors, chartreuse or white or darker colors, depending on the color of the water. I primarily use, I prefer spinning rods, and I like the braid. I'm using 10-pound J braid, and then I typically run a very long 10 or 12 pound fluorocarbon leader, and I use bass tackle. Like these are 7 to 7.5 foot, these are Daiwa Tula rods, so that you could use them in the summer for bass and walleye. But these handle, can you go back one for a second? Yeah, so there's just jumping around. Like you can choose different colors to pair to your plastic. Some people love white, can't go wrong with straight white. Some people like the blue back. But if you have a couple different offerings for them based on light conditions and water conditions, you can really trick a lot of fish. So this essentially is going to imitate a large emerald shiner or a baby smelt that looks exactly like what they eat. And originally when I started fishing the river when I was younger, I'd always use heavy jig heads. And I just thought, I gotta stay near the bottom and I got a jig. But we started using like much lighter baits. We had a bite going. There'll be some different pictures. Yuiji, you can jump around a bit, yeah, just to show them. We started using lighter ones, right? Much lighter than you'd ever think. Like this little guy here, like if I told you out in 70 feet of water to throw this, would this be your first choice? Like there was a time where I would agree. I'd be like, I'm not putting that on, it's too. But the one thing I've learned with the Great Lakes trout is they love to look up, right? And they're not afraid to hit something that's like just below the surface. So even over deep water, the nice thing is you don't snag. These do cost a little bit more, and if you go too heavy, they're very easy to snag, right? And one thing about current that I'll mention is, let's just say this table is the direction, right? So the river is flowing this way, Lake Ontario is out here, and my boat is drifting. I'm always casting, I never cast upstream, unless I'm like spot locked and I want to get it down deeper. I'm always casting straight across or slightly down. And I don't know what it is, but just the way it pulls the lure. And it's kind of like if you've ever fished a spinner or a spoon in a river. If you go too far up, you got no feel, you snag, you lose it. But if you have tension on your line, you get a really nice swing. And if you are slowing down with the trollometer, you can follow your line with the rod tip, or again, you could start your retrieve. And a lot of times, like let's just say the three of us are all fishing together, I might say, you count to 5, you go to 20, you count to 30, and start your retrieve. But having the different, we got on a bite, lake trout is closed until December 1st. And there's a lot of them there, and they typically relate to the bottom. Yes, they come up high, yes, they suspend, but it seems like the browns will layer above them. And we got on some stuff in the past couple of years where we were throwing lighter, like this is a 2/7. They're a little bit off sizes, but it's a lighter 2/7, and then there's a 3/8 and there's a 5/8, and now there's some new sizes where they go 3/4 ounce, 1 ounce, and 1.5 ounces. So we've got everything, and even down to 1/16. But by using the different sizes on a day-to-day basis based on wind and based on the color of the water and the mood of the fish, we're picking up a lot, like we're eliminating the lake trout when the season's closed, and at times putting a ridiculous amount of brown trout in the boat by fishing higher in the column. So if you get a chance to fish the Great Lakes, I want you guys to try that. Remember that. Just say like you don't have to be anywhere near the bottom, right? The other thing that I've learned with these lures is like you could fish it slowly. There's two types of things we do. We do casting and retrieving, and then we also do. Has anyone ever fished in current in a boat? Right? So like you're moving, and it's very easy for your line to get away from you. So if you're fishing vertically, I try to keep it so that my line is like straight up and down, right? So I'm chasing the line with my trolling motor, or the wind is such or no wind that allows me to keep it vertical. If your line starts pulling all the way to the left or all the way to the right and you're vertical, you don't have the same presentation, the same feel. So the two things we do is do that casting that we talked about, and then with this situation, the heavier sizes may give you better feel, but we'll lower it down to the bottom. And then we'll do a lot of times, like let me show you something that I get my guests to do a lot. So you and I are fishing together, and what was your name again? Paul. Paul? That's fantastic. I won't forget that. I'm Paul too. That's great. It's a great name. So a lot of times I'll be like, Paul, I want you to do one full reel. So we know now with one full reel, that's roughly 3 feet off the bottom. And then I might say, what was your name again? Rob, I want you to do 2 turns. So another turn. Now we're like almost 6 feet off the bottom, but see how little I did with that? So each reel, you got to learn what it does. But as I drift, and sometimes I start out, I'm at 80, 90 feet, and I'll do this right up into 14 feet. But that off the bottom, it gets rid of the snag. So if I'm going up the hill and there's a depth change and I bump bottom, I just immediately do a single turn or a double turn. And that keeps me in that zone. And I've learned that these trout, the Lakers and the Browns too, when they're relating to the bottom, they love to come up, right? So you'll get this bite where like your rod tip is loaded, you'll feel it. It's like, you know, it's kind of like this from the weight of it, and all of a sudden it just goes, does that. And if you don't set the hook, they're gone. When they smash it, that's easy, right? But it's just like slow movements, chasing. It's like you got your trolling motor going. This requires a bit more, but you're actually chasing your line, either backwards or forwards or sideways. And if you're having a hard time with that, that's where that casting and retrieving really comes into play. And again, you know, the majority of this with these are the same, like I literally took these out of my boat this morning. I got to put them back inside. I'm back on the river tomorrow, but these are the rods and reels that, if you're out with me, this is what we're fishing with. So I mentioned the light one. I mentioned this is a staple. Again, most of these, like this is a 3.5 inch, but that looks just like a little shiner, right? There's lots of different brands. That's a Kitech. This is a Bass Assassin. There's another one that's Bass Assassin. So it really depends on what you want to. You could put a fluke style, right? Or like a fork tail, which is really nice. It cuts the water a little faster, less resistance. And sometimes that subtle action of just that is what they want. And then the boot tails, you know, it's got more drag, but the vibration and the thump and the way it swims sometimes is what they want. So I recommend running both. All these jigs come with either a 2-aught hook or a 4-aught hook. So it's good to pair the plastic, you know, with either one. And these are made by Nishine Lure Works, but they were designed by Ichikawa, right? So this Ichikawa steel, yeah, which is a great steel. It sharpens really well. They've got really cool eyes that reflect sunlight amazingly. But this, if you have to pick one, I think like everybody that fishes the bar uses a white swim bait. But they're just like clear water, dirty water, overcast, sunny. It's like if you have to pick one color, it's the color. And then you tweak it, like, you know, you do good on bluegill flash, and he loves emerald shiner, and it's like you kind of get your favorites. But the lighter heads, I think, from this portion of what we're talking about is something that I don't think people are doing enough of for the trout. Everyone's heavy, heavy, heavy on the bottom, pound the bottom, and it's deadly. That works, but people are missing fish, right? And they streak around. Like a brown can come up, chase bait. Next thing you know, he's down 40 feet. Next thing you know, he's up 10 feet. We don't get a lot of steelhead out there. Occasionally we'll get steelhead. But having like a few different size heads and a few different, you know, baits is a really good way to go. Now, we talked about light baits. I want to ask you guys a question. And all these other ones here, those three there, they all have 10-pound braid. They all have a 10 or 12-pound leader. But I want to ask you, and this is something new for me out there, but this is a 15th ounce, very, very tiny. This is a new product that will be available this fall. Yeah, this fall by Nishine Lure Works. It's a finesse smelt head. It's got a little blade on it. I started throwing this in testing, and I was throwing this in like 10 feet to 80 feet of water. And the main thing with this is I could keep it up higher. And there's times where the fish you'll catch them and they're barfing. Like they barf, and they tell you what they're eating. So you see these little teeny baby emeralds, and that's when I'd pair this. Like sometimes I'd put bigger plastics on it, like a 4-inch or even a 5-inch. But it's the weight, and see that little blade? So I was able to like hit my trolling motor. You're with me. I'd be like, okay, give me a cast on a 45, hit my trolling motor. You get a real good swing going. But this would keep it away from the Lakers. So I'm out there in November, the season's closed, and we can, you know, I'm not gonna sit there and catch 25 lake trout a season. It's just against what I do, but it keeps me out there catching fish. So the bar this year was very unique. There was a lot of Chinook salmon. I don't know if you saw some of the pictures, but there was like Chinook salmon. So we're catching Chinooks mixed in and brown trout and lake trout. But this bait, if you're going to throw it, you know, you do need lighter line. This is 6-pound J-braid, and I've got 8, 7, or 6-pound leader. So if you use too heavy of line with this, you can't cast it. You can't feel it. It's just too hard to chuck unless you use a float. So you can use a float to give you more weight with a stiffer rod, and you'll get it out there. But it's pretty cool learning. Like even if you don't have all the fancy electronics, if you got one graph that tells you I'm in 10 feet of water, you can still pick up bait fish on there. You can still pick up bottom. You'll get some separation with fish on the bottom. But all of these techniques too, the other thing that was a big deal. Anybody out there have this, like a Mega Live or live technology? Does anyone use that? Yeah? Okay. So the other thing that we were doing that was amazing, like these show up really good for suspended. So you start in deep water, right? So you're in like 90 feet, 80 feet, and I just drop it down sometimes 40 feet, you go down 60 feet, you go down 10 feet, and we just hang it. Keep it vertical, leave it, and watch fish come up on you too. So that was the other thing that was really cool, because there's days that you can tell when they want to chase. Like you can just tell by the mood of them, like you start doing it, it's like right away, they want it. And then there's days where they want it just drifting in the current, slowly. But we were picking up like a lot of kings this year, right? And it was a unique year, they're not always there, but like, I don't know if you guys have ever caught a chrome silver king in November, December. They fight like crazy. And it's pretty cool, like it's pretty awesome. So this is another one that they have. This is the Smelt Head Plus. So this will be available soon. And I think a lot of guys are really gonna dig this for different things, or ice fishing or vertical, but it's available in 3/4 ounce, 1 ounce, and 1.25 ounces. And it's got a hook that doesn't bend. Like you can't bend this. I haven't yet. The only time I've had any issues with the hooks has been like a big lake trout in the net. They get in the net, they start rolling, so sometimes that happens. But as far as like fighting fish and hook sets, no issues. These, you're gonna need heavier equipment, right? I fish a lot on a stiffer bait caster, 7 foot, 7.5. I like straight 20-pound fluoro, but you'll have way better feel with braid. Like if you ran 15 or 20 or 30-pound braid with a small leader, you'll feel so much better. This is just a personal preference thing. And I also like this, if it's colder, it doesn't freeze like braid does, right? So if you're gonna get into the Smelt Head Plus, you gotta make sure that your spinning rod is heavy enough to support these so you don't break them casting. You'll bust your rod casting. So make sure your gear is good, but if you're a summertime guy out at the bar, or even the fall, or you fish an inland lake, these are amazing for that whole drop it down, reel it, you're doing that, you're reeling it up through the water column thing, like the Simcoe chase they call it. This has been amazing, right? A really good bait. So having a variety of you don't need a ton of, you literally could do the same thing with 2 packages of plastics by just changing the head. So if you had a few natural colors, and then you had, a few bright colors and a few different sizes, like the hollow bellies sometimes when the alewives are really present, sometimes they prefer this. I don't know why, it looks kind of goofy, but they love that hollow belly stuff. And then sometimes I throw these giant, this is a 5.8, right? And I get bigger bites, especially in the spring. So I'll throw this sucker, I'll go up the hill and just keep going. There's a probably 3 miles of current that dumps out in the lake and then veers east. And these lake trout get up hunting, these browns get up hunting on these flats. And sometimes, do you guys know what strolling is? Essentially it's trolling with your trolling motor. Sometimes we'll just drag these around until we see them, and if we get a couple, we'll stop and start fan casting the area. But having, some basic stuff, and again, like I mentioned before, the same jig head, this is 3/4 ounce, but this is like a 5-inch jerk shad, it's called, right? And this is a fluke. But these knife the water, they drop quick, they have no resistance. Whereas I drop this down, the fall rate would be like this versus, right? And current will be grabbing this a lot more. But having just some, whatever paddle tails you have, and then some different weights in these smelt heads, if you're not doing it, you haven't done it.
Appearing on the Bush main stage at 4 o'clock, please join Mike Miller and August Miller from OFA's Angler and Hunter TV.
There we go. Do you guys have any questions? None? Zero? No? Not yet? What are you guys? You guys came last year, didn't you? Were you here last year? No? Okay. Okay. Well, you got a question? Yeah.
If you're fishing from the shore, where would you go?
Okay, so if on the Great Lakes, let's just use Lake Ontario, for example, right? Yeah. Any creek mouth, if you go on Google Earth and just look at any creek mouth, it's all about timing. Right? So if you have this time of year, it's going to be an early spring. So when you get that mud dumping out into the crystal clear water, that mud's going to heat up faster. The bait fish the emerald shiners are going to pile in there, or depending on where you are, the smelts are going to pile into there. And all trout do, they eat like crazy. They just eat. The browns we catch sometimes are so disproportionate, they're so fat. They're this long, but they're this fat. Yeah, for real. So so any pier you have access to, any creek mouth. If you have waders, sometimes there's muddy, like I mean in the mud.
Like, are you talking down here like Welland?
Yeah, like Port Weller's an amazing area, but it's a freaking long walk to get to that creek mouth. But it's doable, right? And there's a pier there. Port Dalhousie is a great spot. You can fish out Grimsby, you can fish out Hamilton. There's some beach stuff down by Jordan you can fish. You know, you can go to up to the States. It can work on the other side too, but I'm just using that South Shore as reference, right? But anywhere you can access it, and pay attention to the wind. You know, a wind coming in April is miserable. An offshore wind on your back and the sun's out, it's a gorgeous thing, right? So that's the other thing with the bar too. Like safety is a huge thing. So if you've got a boat and you're thinking of going, you really want to learn your winds because you got current going out, meeting a crosswind. And right when that hill, you can go from being very nice and you're like, oh, this is great. And all of a sudden you get up that hill and the freaking waves could be this high and this far apart. So it can get, and it's going to want to spin your transom into the waves. So you've been there. Yeah, right? So you know what I'm talking about, right? So boat safety is like number one there. There is a section of the water there that's on the American side and some that's on the Canadian side. So you really want to be aware of that and make sure you have a New York State license. But yeah, really like access, we have a ton of access, and I just don't think people, like if you can learn the timing of it, and it takes some trial and error, there's some amazing opportunities. And like if I was on shore, say you and I were going tomorrow from shore, you're gonna want those lighter heads because you can still throw it a mile. You can get it out there good, but sometimes you can overwork it, so you want to be able to just like work it accordingly. And obviously the closer you get to, if you're on foot, the shallower it gets, unless you're on a pier. Like Port Dalhousie is a great spot to park and fish.
Yeah, okay.
And it's hit or miss. It's hit or miss. Like you can go there and catch a 15-pound brown. Like I swear, any given time in February and March, they come and go. They come in and out of there all the time. Okay, so in Ontario, brown trout is year-round, steelhead is year-round. Lake trout closed September 30th and reopened December 1st. Right, so it's pretty open unless you're targeting lake trout, right? And lake trout in the fall, they come really close to shore and spawn, so at times are hard to keep off. Right? Do you know what I mean? Like they'll spawn like against the rocks. They don't make a bed. They'll spawn like in a ball of them. There's another bait too that we use often. Have you guys heard of and going back to that Elway thing? Have you heard of have we gone through all the for smelt-head? We have, yeah. Who's got a watch on? 5 to 4. Okay. So another one that we use a lot is the Simcoe 75 and the Simcoe 75 heavyweight. And this is it's got no rattle, silent, but the hooks make a ton of noise. This is an amazing bait to a vertical jig or to cast and yo-yo through the column, right? So there's times where you'll see out there, you'll literally see bait jumping out of the water and browns and kings and stuff chasing, or the fish are regurgitating it, but it's got 2 line ties. It's got a forward one that's hard to see, and you guys can come up and look if you want. And then it's got one that's back a little bit further. And the one that's back a little further is for more of like, you know, you're doing your jigging, you know, up and down, which works great. Again, you're chasing your line, and you get a real good like out of this, almost like a blade bait. You know, short little snaps, following it on the way down, or snap up and let it pendulum down. And then the other one is that you can do a steady retrieve. And again, spinning or bait casting. And on this one, I like a little tip. It's a jerkbait rod, 7-foot jerkbait rod. With, you know, I use straight 16 or straight. They're not line shy. And some of these lures they cost a little bit more, so you don't want to use like 8 or 6 pound tests, right? Like use heavier stuff, right? I guess the only thing that can be concerned sometimes is safety. The hooks are really sharp, and lake trout love to twist, and brown trout love to twist. So if you're using trebles, just like be aware of that, right? Always, right? So the Simcoe 75 is another bait that has just proven itself out there. If they're bumping your swim bait too, like sometimes you're reeling in and you get like, oh, I missed one. Oh, I missed one. It's single hook. I love the single hook for the management of the fish and the safety of the fish, but there's times where the trouble, just if they bump this, they're in trouble. They get it, right? So it's a deadly bait. The lighter version is really nice, but I fish the heavier one a lot there because you're constantly dealing with wind, and you are again. This I find for me this is really excelled with that, that jig program or with the live technology. This shows up like crazy, and watching fish come up and chase this, it's pretty cool how a snap or bringing it up. You know how you see them up higher? You bring it up to their level, give it one snap, and watch them react to it. So recently we had, the other day we were actually targeting walleye, but we had 4 brown trout just come out of nowhere and just like, they had to have it kind of deal. As soon as they hurt, if you fished it once, you'd feel the vibration. You ever used a blade bait? You know what so it's got like a vibration, right? Heavy vibration. Yes?
I got the one with they look like that, but they have the rattle in them.
Yeah, so this is very deceiving. Like it looks like just a standard rattle bait, right? It's not. It's much, much more. It really is. Like feel the weight of that for a compact bait, right? So that's between 3/4 of an ounce and 1 ounce.
Yeah, okay. So
Yeah. I use this on a bit stiffer rod. This is a shaky head rod, but again, 12-pound leader, 10-pound braid. I just like the spinning rod for picking up line with trout and the feel and the braid, because if a fish touches it and I'm on a long cast, I know it. The fluorocarbon sometimes, you know, like you miss them, right? Personal preference, but the Simcoe has been an outstanding bait for, you could use it off the pier and reel it like a rattle trap. We've caught all kinds of brown trout, we've caught rainbows with it, we've caught all kinds of lake trout, but if the water's off-colored or if the fish just seem to be not in a chasing mood and it's almost like a reaction strike, like a provoking thing, they get irritated because it flutters up by them, they get irritated and they just like kill it. Whereas some of the other baits, like you could tell they're really feeding, right? So this has been one that's given me, you know, extra bites, or if you're with me and you just missed 3 in a row and you're like, what am I doing wrong? Nothing. The fish aren't committing to this, they're just bumping this. They just nudge it, right? Yeah, they just nudge it, exactly. Whereas if they nudge this, they're getting it, right? So that's a really, really good combination, is having like a variety of weight. So I again, stressing like, if you're fishing the Niagara Bar and you're fishing for trout in general, goal is try going as light as possible. Like some of the weights I use, like I said, like there's stuff you use for crappie and perch. But the difference is this hook won't bend. So you catch a 25-pound lake trout, that is not going to bend unless it starts doing a death roll in the net. Most of the light stuff, the trout are big and they're mean, right? Like they destroy your hooks. You hook this giant trout and next thing you know, like your hook's toast. So that was the one thing that we put a lot of time in together, was making sure that like these things can then hold up, right? I don't really pound the bottom with these. They're too nice. You can jig the bottom, they work great. But you know, for the cost of the premium stuff, if you start snagging and losing them, like you start dragging the bottom at the Niagara Bar, you can go through, as you're learning the process, like you go through some jigs, right? The other thing we did with some of these bigger ones is, and I mentioned it, and even the lighter ones, is I was putting these in a spread trolling with planer boards and having some wicked success at times, right? So I do my spring troll thing at times, there's periods where we do it. So I started using the swim baits, and I might fish the heavy ones closer or the lighter ones further back, right? And sometimes straight down the pipe, right? Or sometimes on a smaller board. I have these 5-inch Churches boards, and they were pretty cool too. So they're super versatile. And the snap, that's an optional thing, but I love fishing these with a snap. Nishine Lure Works makes this snap. I've never broken one, ever. And it just quick changing, so you've only got, some people have 10 rods, some people only have 1 rod or 2 rods, so that just gives you like, you go from a 5/8, you know, you go from this size to this size to this size in, you know, without having to, right? Just real quick, and I'll tell you right now, they don't care. There's situations where I think you got to be more stealthy, more finessey, but if a fish is committing to this, he really doesn't give a care at all.
Not even on the smaller ones?
Yeah. Well, yeah, absolutely. Well, I can, and I have lots of times. I prefer. He convinced me of the snaps. You get a little bit extra action out of them. It does increase the action. It doesn't affect the bite. The only time I don't want the snap is if I want to hang it perfectly horizontal, and then I'll take it, I'll tie it. They're very well balanced where they sit, but on the snap they might drop on you. So if I want to do that horizontal presentation or Jamaican style or vertical style, whatever it is, I'll tie direct. If I don't care, like if I'm swinging it or twitching it in the column or reeling it in the column, it doesn't matter. Yeah. I agree though. There's times where you can't, you'll kill what you're trying to do with it. It just won't look right in the water. What you guys, anything else? No? Hiroshi, do you want to add anything to this? There he is there, the man, Hiroshi. So he's the guy behind all this, right? He's put a ridiculous amount of time in. There's some lures that he waited 10 years to release, right? So like I know everyone here tells you everything's the best, and I'm not gonna say it's the best, but I use these every day. I guide all year. I've been doing this for a very long time. This is year 24 for me. And these have caught, I don't know, like no one here has fished in my boat with me, but these have caught my clients so many fish. They catch other species too, but the main thing with this is try them for trout, right? They work wherever I've been. The other thing that we didn't mention off the piers, your shore guys, and even out at the bar, is I fish them under floats sometimes because I want it to sit at one spot. I want to get it away from the boat. Or it gives me a chance to fish slowly and cover water. You can open your bail, let the current from the wind or the current from the river take it out further. But under a float is another, like, it's one of those things that you have to see it to get confidence in it. But once you have a day with it, you're like, oh my goodness, that was really cool, right? So not many guys do that with confidence yet. It's kind of like a shore thing primarily, and there's nothing wrong with that, but it's definitely a boat thing too. Yeah. I don't know what else to really, I think that's kind of covered everything.
For a 4-inch swim bait,
Yeah.
are you using a 2-aught hook?
Well, that's a great question. So the 2-aught and the 4-aught, like, you know, two different baits, but you see the positioning of the hook? See how much further back it is? Okay, it's 4-aught, 2-aught. The 2-aught, what I did find that was pretty interesting is I get way more swing. Okay, so I have seen it where it's like, holy cow, why is that guy getting more bites? And then I switch, I double down. So there's time, but, and having said that though, I like the 4-aught because it's just a bigger hook, right? Like it's got more bite to it, but I've seen it where the 4-aught on, let's say for example, this is a 5-inch Kitech here, right? Which is another great bait. But the 2-aught in here might be too short, but it's gonna give me wicked action. But the 4-aught I'm hooking more. So, you know, I love the 2-aught, but at times it's too, you got to kind of pair it, right? And see them, if they're just choking it, it doesn't matter. A lot of times it's like, holy cow, get the pliers, it's gone. But there's times where they're skin hooked. You know, they'll bump it, especially because there's a ton of browns, they're only this big. It's still fun as heck, right? But they don't necessarily eat it, right? They'll eat the little one, but a big one, they'll take a knock at it. So I'll have both on deck. I usually just put them in my carpet of my boat, and I just play around, right? Experiment. But there isn't a better answer for that other than the increased action. Hiroshi, you and I have seen that, where the 2-aught sometimes it's like, why is that working? But it's just the swing we established with a paddle tail that was giving us better. Yeah.
What about water clarity?
Okay, so that's a great topic. So I think one of the most common things that people lack confidence is off-colored water or change. Everyone thinks it's got to be green, it's got to be clear, and I'm going to tell you right now, some of my best days out there, I'm the only boat out there, and I can barely see my prop. So water clarity, there's things that I've learned from years of testing with Hiroshi, and I mean this, is like there's a noise that comes off your lure even in dirty water. Like even the plastic, even just this movement underwater is like whoosh, whoosh. So as you're drifting, whoosh, and if there's fish positioned, there's vibration, lateral line, and then there's the noise. So we've had it, like I said, the water's not mud, but like you look and you're like, can you see the prop? You're like, kind of. And had some pretty good days. So I found on those days, it hasn't been so much a chasing thing. That's where that, okay, you reel once, you reel twice, maybe once in a while hit the bottom, you know, shake, 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 pause, shake, shake. I've done really well. And I'll share something with you guys, small group, and it's, don't tell anybody. I'm playing a lot with largemouth bass colors. He's been with me. Like I'm using watermelon red flake. I'm using black and blue. I'm using white a lot, but I'm using darker tones. And guys are like, what the heck is that guy doing? Like I just got off the natural colors. Like bluegill flash is, I don't have any of the other ones here, but bluegill flash is one that's great. Bluegill flash with a white smelt head, phenomenal. Just a good combination. Or like that watermelon red this year with the white, unbelievable some days. So by trying to think like green pumpkin, June bug, things that you, like, not many people are doing that. They either throw white or they say it's too dirty, or they're throwing natural. So my rule of thumb generally is if it's stable, like meaning like you're not there on the first day it gets dirty. So it's day 3, day 4, day 5, and it's either in a clearing trend or it's stable, good to go. The first day it's changing is always really hard. Yeah, so to answer your question, I go often when people think it's too dirty, but you got to look at it this way. So for the Niagara Bar, you get a small area. Let's just say the prime spot is the size of this venue. okay? Let's just say, for example, just putting it out there, you have 20,000 fish in that area, and you're the only boat out there. Aren't you happy if we get 10 or 15? Like do you know what I mean? Like the odds are in your, there's so many fish at times that are stacked up, and the prime for that, really, if you remember this, the magic number out there for me is between like 42 and 48 degrees. And that can last, depending on how cold it gets in the fall or the spring on the warming trend. So if you have ice on Lake Erie, that can last for weeks. It stays 42, 43, 44 for weeks, or it could go 42 one day, 43 the next day. Like there's no ice this year, so it's going to heat up really quick, and it changes. So when the water stays, like if you had to pick a perfect number, if it could be 46 all the time, the bait, you'll see the birds all hovering there, and you'll see the bait all there, and the bite stays longer. So if I go there and it's you and I got a trip booked for December the 10th, and everyone's, it's great because everyone's gone. You guys are like, what are we doing here? But then we go out there and there's 10,000 trout there, and we're doing our thing, and we're not dealing with 7-foot waves, and it's safe. You get a lot more than you realize. And with using the live, which isn't an option for everybody, but it's pretty cool what you learn from it, just how well they do see in dirty water and how many rejections you get. If you're able to track your bait and see trout come up and go away and fish come up and go away. So I used to think it was too dirty, too dirty, too dirty. And then I got sick of canceling and sitting around the house, so I started going fishing. This is like years. I just go out and try and test. And then we started to figure out like, okay, like maybe on the Canadian side, the current's really fast, but if you slightly go on the American side, it's maybe like 1.5 miles slower. So a little bit slower water, a little bit slower movements, but still with movements. And we still do surprisingly well. So it's something that you have to, you can obviously book a guide and learn from, or it's something you have to like put the time in with confidence, right? Ideally, it's green and 3+ feet of viz, but the reality is if you've got 1 day a week to fish, and that's your day, as long as you're not dealing with like a north wind or an east wind or something that's coming in, if you have an offshore wind, which is like your winds there are south, southwest, a little bit of southeast, or light and variable, you can, and you get out of that real heavy stuff and get on the edges of it, you can do pretty good still, right? As long as like right now the water's 30, yesterday it was 36. There's not as many out there, but they're still there. So your just expectations have to be, but when the chaos is there, spring and fall, when all that bait's there, that's when it's like, it's a pretty cool fishery, right? And the smelt heads have been like, you can troll lures and you can use live minnows and you can jig the bottom, but the main point I wanted to share with you guys is like that upper part of the water column, the higher part up for, I don't know if you guys like brown trout, like I think everybody likes, right? Like so that one fish there was it was 1810. It was like pure luck, because the next cast you can catch one this big, but there's really big fish that feed up high, right? In all the Great Lakes, but especially wherever you have current, heavy current and a little bit of color dumping into Lake Ontario in the fall and the spring. If you time it right and you're safe, and you've got the proper licenses, you don't need to reinvent the wheel. You don't have to go buy, you don't need all these rods. But if you have a couple rods and reel, if you had to pick one combination, 7-foot to 7.6 spinning rod, like that Daiwa Tatula, with a 2,500 or 3,000 reel with 10-pound braid and a 10 and 12-pound leader, that can, for that type of fishing, that kind of covers everything. It really does. You don't need to, unless you're throwing the Smelt Head Plus, and you can get a spinning rod for it, but if I were to try to cast that jig on this spinning rod, I'd probably snap the rod and I wouldn't have enough power to set the hook, and you know what I mean? So you just pair your equipment, but that one combination I just described will pretty much cover any brown trout, lake trout, or steelhead casting scenario from a boat or from shore. You may want a longer rod. You can use a 9-footer, you can use a 10-footer, whatever you want. But the same rods that you're using in the summertime for bass, pike, or walleye, you can use, at the Niagara Bar for the trout too. And I think, these are just some extra stuff that we did from this morning. I think I went over the Simcoes. If you guys don't have any other questions, I really appreciate you guys coming by. My name is Paul again, Castellano. Thanks so much, guys. Any other questions? No? You got one? You put your hand up.
So, would that be like March, April that you were talking prime for what you're
Yeah, so it's all water temperature. Yeah. So if you use Coast Watch, I believe is the site, but if you just type in like Lake Erie, which sounds weird, Lake Erie water temperature, because it's flowing down, Buffalo, you'll know what the water is on the lower.
So if like I wanted to plan a trip, book a trip.
Oh, okay. So prime, like anytime November, December, just know the temperature at some point is going to plummet, and and we might be stuck in the river. And then again, really, like I was out there on Thursday. It was phenomenal. But normally some years you're not out there because it's too cold. So you're fishing it again in April and May historically. But this year, because there's no ice on Lake Erie, May might be the end, right? So it's all, again, it's a timing thing. And I took notes for years, right? Write it down. And then you start to notice patterns, very similar, right? And that was the key that I found was that, again, that, you can catch them at 36. There's still quite a bit of bait there, but really like the lower end would be 36, and the higher point would be like, it seems like when it gets above 52, you got a chance at first light, and then come 9:30, it's over. But when it's colder, when it's between like, again, that 40 and 48, like they just chew all day, right? And some days you go out there, it's freaking crazy. There's 50 boats. And other days you go out there because it's too dirty, and I'm like, this is great. It's just us. or two other guys or something like that, right? So, that's it. But safety number one out there because it's big water. Learn the winds. The current? That's a good question. So depending on where you are, because there's different spots. Some points it's like 1.2 miles an hour, 0.8 miles an hour, up to about 3 miles an hour, 2.8, depends where, without wind speed, without cross current. Right? So it's more the waves. It's big. Yeah. Like some days you go, the problem is they're so, like I said, you go up that hill and the waves are so tight together. If you're not experienced with it, like you could fill your boat with water quick. So a lot of times I would highly recommend that you nose into it, right? With your trolling motor so that your bow's taking it. You can do a constant slow speed because if you're fighting a fish and your transom's going first, you get one wave over it, two waves over it. It's stressful, right? And then if it's cold, you're going to get ice. Right, so just safety number one. If the conditions are right, it's an amazing fishery. And using the smelt heads out there it's changed the way I guide. And a lot of my clients that have been coming, some of them over 10 years, they're buying it. They're going back on their own. I'm happy if people go back and are catching fish. That's it's changing. Always reloading, right? It changes. Tomorrow's different than 2 days ago. New fish come in, and really the best part about it is New York State stocking. Is crazy. So this is they stock like crazy. So we benefit from, Ontario does too, but the state of New York puts so much into stocking. They drive up to the boat ramp that's at the mouth with a tanker in the spring and dump. I can't even tell you how many browns in, another species. Yeah, so and they hang around and we have all these bait fish. So it's a really unique way to fish. It's fun. Yes, you can go there with minnows, like I said. You can go there with different trolling techniques. You can use all kinds of stuff, but keeping stuff lighter and higher in the column, especially early in the year, November, it just keeps it clean. You know what I mean? You catch some really gorgeous browns. It's a ton of fun. I guess the only complaint is you can go through a lot of plastics because they get destroyed, but that's the game, right? So I don't know if you guys don't have any other questions. I really appreciate you guys coming. And again, my name is Paul. Thanks so much, guys. Do I have a what? Yeah, so the booth is just over by the, one aisle, 2 aisles over, down halfway. They have a booth there, and then some of the...
Wrapper, under the wrapper.
Under the Rapala sign?